All right, first of all, just get ready for something different. Basically, I'm not a conservative, so I'm coming at this from probably, in some odd ways, more of a left or Marxist perspective than you might expect. Just so you know, I was brought up in a fairly liberal household. I went to Berkeley, and I was a protege of the late Mike Harrington. So just to start with that. But I don't think it means that I differ a great deal with what's been said before. I'm not so interested in reviving the right, but I am interested in responding to what I think is autocracy. And so my biggest instinct is always to fight against autocracy, so that's why I'm here today, and I'm working with Arthur. One of the things that's clearly changed, and that I think the speakers before have gotten into this quite well, is that we now are seeing this redefinition of what the role of companies is. Are they profit-making, and they're going to come and they're going to go, and they're sort of value neutral? And from the social democratic perspective is, yeah, they're value neutral. They play a role. They create prosperity. And when they go off the rails, we regulate them. That was a reasonable response, I think, over time. We've sort of gotten away from that. I want to go a little bit into what the parallels are of what we're seeing today with what is happening elsewhere. First of all, and I'll get into this a bit, we're really evolving quite a bit into something very much like China. As we compete with China, we become more like them. Now, that's probably good from a gastronomic point of view, but but outside of that, I'm not so happy about it. Deng Xiaoping, I've been going to China for 40 years, and and I have to admit, I am astounded by the changes. I mean, you do not understand what's happened if you haven't seen it over this long period of time. But his idea was, he said, we're developing socialism with Chinese characteristics, which means we can cheat, and we can actually, Chinese people are very entrepreneurial people. We're going to take advantage of that. Chinese moms want their kids to do really well. We're going to take advantage of that. So the United States is now doing something that increasingly resembles Chinese capitalism with American characteristics. And I'll get into what those characteristics are, but it's a similar drive towards autocracy and control from above. To give you some numbers, because I think I'll talk a little bit about the economy, the concentration of industry and finance since the 1990s, a tenth of the U.S. economy is made up of areas where 4 firms dominate more than 2/3 of the market. Finance, information, technology among the most concentrated. Financial sector. I remember when there were small banks all over this country where they had relations with local people. Some of them were ethnic banks. The most recent numbers in the percentage of deposits in the largest commercial banks in the United States was 15% in 1984. It's 44% today. It's a 3-fold increase. Local banks have simply disappeared. These were little centers of intelligence and civic culture, and they went from 11,000 in 1983 to barely 4,000 in 2018. So let's just say that there's a bit of a anti-small business pogrom going on of sorts. Okay, then the most frightening is what the speakers have raised, the concentration of technology and social media firms. I'm old enough to remember the early days of Silicon Valley, which were very exciting, about all sorts of diversity, we're going to empower people like we've never seen before, and the consumer is going to be in the lead, and all this stuff you read back from, my friend, the late Al Toffler, he wrote about these things. There was an excitement, and there was, and I think that is understandable. But what do we have now? We have a few companies that completely dominate almost all the major sectors. There's a handful of companies that are about 40% of the Standard & Poor's. That's unprecedented concentration. The pandemic has been extraordinarily good for this tech oligarchy. The blog, The Bellows, I do follow sometimes the Marxist blogs a bit, tripled its profits, and Jeff Bezos made $70 billion. I guess he's got to share that with his wife or ex-wife. And the billionaires earned over $1 trillion since March. In 2020, the top 7 tech firms added $3.4 trillion in value. So this is a direct danger to democracy. You don't have to be a conservative to feel this way. Traditionally, the way I was brought up, more on the left, was concentrations of power are dangerous. This is, you can go back to, British theory back in even before the Revolution. But it was Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice Brandeis, who said, we can have democracy in this country or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. We can't have both. And I think he was completely correct. The reality is we are in a situation which is, with President Biden, sort of the springtime for oligarchs. There'll be talk about, oh, we're going to break them up. Believe me, this administration is so packed with people who have represented, worked for, gotten contributions from the oligarchs that they're not going to limit Google. They're not going to break up Facebook. I don't think it's going to happen. So where did this thesis that companies would line up with government in this way in very large concentrations? And I think, the first really good example of this that I found, looking at it historically, was from Italy under Mussolini. Mussolini, we think of him as kind of a buffoon today, but actually from a philosophical point of view, he was actually fairly sophisticated. And his notion was that you would have an alliance of the large property owners with the state. And as long as the property owners and the big industrial groups followed what the state wanted, he was fine with it. This is very much like what you see in China. China, the companies are expected to act in the national interest. You talk about globalism. They believe in globalism as in conquering the globe. That's what globalism is in China. When companies steal technology from Western companies, they're called patriotic thieves. And the idea is that they are going to promote the prosperity of the Chinese people, not necessarily just for that one reason, but this is the way the Communist Party stays in power. I mean, this has been the pattern of Chinese history from the beginning. So they also know that the U.S. is completely not going to do anything about it. And actually, big corporate America is probably the biggest handmaiden that they have. You get Michael Bloomberg, who increasingly symbolizes what the Democratic Party has become, as this is a description of China: ecologically friendly, democratically accountable, and invulnerable to the threat of revolution. And by the way, Xi Jinping is not a dictator, just so you know. In the U.S., it's a different story. It's not the government on top. It's the corporations on top, and their role in creating the present administration. I mean, let's face it. The heart of the Democratic Party wanted Bernie Sanders, and that part of the heart that didn't want Bernie Sanders wanted Elizabeth Warren, and they got Joe Biden. And if you want to understand how that happened, you have to understand the politics of fundraising, and you also have to understand, as was mentioned earlier, the Jeff Bezoses of the world do not like the Bernie Sanders of the world. So I think we have an oligarchy like the one in China, but the bad part of it is that they're not interested in national interests. Our companies are simply interested in using China and using China's production to get things done. They're not also particularly interested in creating employment. Just to give you an idea, in Silicon Valley today, roughly 40% of the employees are either H-1Bs or some other form of indentured servant. So and I ask students of mine, well, you're from San Jose. Did your friends from San Jose get jobs in Silicon Valley? They said, generally not. These companies really now justify themselves not as the old corporations, we provide jobs, we provide opportunity. That's not really the big interest anymore. What they do is they say, okay, we can get PR brownie points. This was very well explained, so I'm not going to go over it again. But by embracing draconian climate policies, if you're a high-tech company, you can make a fortune investing in solar and wind, guaranteed profits, and it doesn't affect your business at all. It does affect, obviously, other people's business. You have these corporate struggle sessions, like something out of, if you read the book about the Cultural Revolution, the world turned upside down, it's remarkably similar to what you had in China, although I guess we don't have to wear dunce caps or get beaten up yet. The company, what is the war corporation? And to me, it's a bargain between the progressive clerisy, the academics, the media, and the upper bureaucracy, and the tech oligarchy, and with their running dog friends in Wall Street. You genuflect to the cause of the month, and then you get a pass. And you're also getting a pass from your own people. I think this was mentioned as well. I spoke with Jim Wunderman, who's the head of the Bay Area Council. Jim used to work for Senator Feinstein in California. And I said, Jim, why are they going along with this stuff? And he said, they're scared shitless of their own employees. That's what's driving it. That they cannot handle 115 people in their company who are going to protest something. By the way, one of the biggest problems, I did a podcast with a venture capitalist the other day, which I found painful to do in some ways. These are the most ignorant people in terms of the Constitution, history, philosophy, religion, than you could ever find. As a friend of mine who's the largest apartment developer in Silicon Valley said, I have never run into a group of people who are more ignorant about the impact of what they're doing than these people. They're nerds. They're very good at certain kinds of things, but they're not really thinking about the implications. They're not interested particularly in grassroots capitalism. Actually, they want to keep things pretty much the way they are. And they, of course, have the help of the libertarian useful idiots who will get there and say, well, it's all, we can't approach Facebook because it's a private company. You have to understand what these people are about. Greg Ferenstein did a really good series, 147 interviews with digital company founders. And what he came back with was they believe that the share of economic wealth will be generated by an ever smaller group of people, and everyone else will live on gig work and government aid. That's the future that's being pressed. The idea is that we will be able to get to what I call oligarchical socialism. In other words, we're seeing this in California right now. The vast majority of this enormous surplus we have from the IPOs, it's not going to go to luring an auto plant to Fresno. It's not going to go to helping start up a whole series of new businesses. It's going to go into people's pockets and subsidize their rents so that they are consistently tied into the state, and that they don't have any reason to want to improve their own lives, getting more independent. This in a state, just to give you an idea, where 80% of all the new jobs over the last decade paid under the median income, and half of those paid under 40,000. So what you end up with is a society in which there is a oligarchy, a well-financed clerisy, which is largely government employees and academics and the media, and then you've got this vast group where there used to be a middle class, you now have increasingly a serf class. These people believe in what Huxley called a scientific caste system. By the way, I would argue that the book to read is not 1984, but Brave New World. Brave New World is where we're headed. And Huxley, who lived in LA, I think got it the best. So what is the world that we're going to create? It's going to be a world where the masses, I studied Latin for 6 years. My mom used to say to me, what are you trying to become Pope? And I said, well, the first Pope was Jewish. So, but what we're having is we're going to have bread and circuses. You know, our next generation not going to have kids. They're going to live in little apartments. It's going to be subsidized, and they can smoke pot, drink, water their plants, and play video games, and be involved in what Google likes to call immersive computing. And that's going to be really great. So what we really need to do is say, what can we do about it? Because everyone sort of tries to deal with it on one level or another. Well, I think there are some opportunities. One, the move on the rapid decarbonization is going to create an enormous impact in the middle of the country, and I think there's going to be a lot of anger about it. We already have a lawsuit, which I've been helping with, by 200 civil rights leaders in California to say that the current climate policies are completely discriminatory to minorities and the poor. And I think, as you suggest, you keep giving in to this logic of the woke, and it's going to bite you back. You know, I saw there was they wrote about it, I wrote this before there, but this whole idea of fully automated luxury communism. That's really what they're going to face with. You know, AOC and Bernie Sanders don't believe that there should be billionaires. So sooner or later, there's going to be a move on their wealth, and I think that that's going to be useful. So what can we do about it? Okay. I think there are a few major things to look at. One is to come up with a program that, like the New Deal, was about expanding ownership and productivity. You can disagree about the New Deal, but its goals were in harmony with a lot of the population, and I think a lot of the things left over, like the TVA, were incredibly positive. That there was the belief in owning a home. That's something that the progressives don't want, that the people want. So there has to be an alliance developed, and this is where I'll just end up with. There has to be an alliance based between people like you who have woken up from your libertarian dogmatic slumbers and want to reach out to this new constituency, but you've got to be able to have a direct contact with it. So I would argue that what you really need to do is have a room that looks very different than this one, a panel that looks different from this one, and you know, I'm perfectly happy to stay in California and not get on a plane. But the reality is you've got to have direct contact with unions, particularly the private sector unions, some of the traditional liberals who are very upset by where the wokes are leading us, and by minorities. If you're going to make the Republican Party a working class party, remember by 2030, 50% of the working class will be black or Hispanic, basically. This alliance is possible, but you're going to have to bring people in. Like I think, you know, the Industrial Areas Foundation, for instance, used my book on feudalism as a textbook for their organizers. That's a break. That's a move into a group that was the Saul Alinsky group, who now realize that the wokes really aren't offering them very much. I think we need to be able to also be very firm that, and I know this is probably going to piss people off, you got to get rid of Trump. You just can't. As long as you have Trump around you, his constituency is getting smaller, and you're not going to be able to communicate well with millennials and minorities on a big basis that you need if you're going to continue to back Trump. I don't see where that gets you anywhere. But I do think that Trump had some good points, and one of the key points is there is a potential coalition among minorities, among working class people, among middle class people that want to restore the American dream to something that we all understood. You can be a New Deal Democrat, or you could be a Eisenhower Republican, or you could be a Taft Republican and still believe in essentially the same thing. That we have to be able to figure out how do we get a working coalition of people who share those values together. Thank you.